I suppose we'll see if he can rise above that.
I have observed you, Watcher. You howl and rage against the powers above you. You have labored at the pleasure of others. That shriveled hag in Hardred House. Those well-bred thieves with their lordly pretensions. The wretched tribesmen playing out their fantasies of bread. And now the gods give you orders and commands, even while you set out to fix what they... The exiled queen is not an ungrateful patron. Finish the work Theos began. Strengthen Woodica with these souls and allow her to become the most powerful of all the gods, with you as her favorite. Yes, consider well the prosperous lives and the power that awaits you.
At your command, the ancient device became your instrument, spinning to life with deafening resonance and gathering up the swirling essence like thread on a great spindle. There, in the pale pulsing glow of the machine that set you on this path long ago, you summoned all your strength, focusing on your objective and blocking out all else. With a single concussive blast that rocked the chamber and sent you tumbling to the ground, you freed the souls from their stasis. Exhausted, your consciousness slipping away, your last sight was of the machine, dark and dormant. Then your eyes closed, and sleep welcomed you at long last. After coming to and searching for some time, you discovered the route Theos used to enter Sun and Shadow, and embarked on a long and arduous ascent back to the surface. You emerged in Ter Evron after days of tunneling through the rubble Theos had left behind, and when you stepped into the daylight, you were faced with a different Dyrwood than the one you had left. At your direction, the lost souls of the Hollowborn were funneled back into the churn of Bareth's wheel to find their way into new vessels and partake in the life they had been denied during Whitewind's legacy. Though parents of Hollowborn would remain just that, the end of Whitewind's legacy would bring about a spate of new, healthy births, with many of the infants bearing souls once meant for Hollowborn children. The natural cycle of life and death had been restored to Dyrwood, and with it came a renewed faith in the providence of the gods. With the birth of his Hollowborn child, the last threads of Lord Radric's sanity frayed and broke apart, his wife the first victim of his wrath. With a fortress to protect him and a garrison of loyal soldiers at his command, he continued to snuff out all signs of resistance from the citizens of Gilded Vale, real or perceived. In the end, all would hang from the boughs of the village's trees, watching over their dead town with vacant eyes. Following the assassinations of Duke Avar Wolfgren and Lady Webb, Defiance Bay was thrown into political upheaval. In the ensuing weeks, the streets had become the domain of looters and blackguards. Few dared to step outside their own doors alone or unarmed. But order would soon come from an unexpected source. House Dominel, realizing that stability was good for business, brought the city's criminal elements in line through a systematic campaign of fear and intimidation. Capitalizing on a reputation for brazen fearlessness earned with the murder of a marshal of the Crucible Knights, the Dominels aggressively pressed their authority, murdering all would-be rivals and collecting coin from all transactions in the city, and becoming arguably the most influential house in all of Dyrwood. Defiance Bay would not fare so well. Squeezed by the Dominels for every piece of copper, prices soared, and trade ground to a halt. Many commoners found themselves unable to make a living, or forced from their homes to make room for others more favored by House Dominel. Petty crime, prostitution, and vagrancy would reach new heights under their watch, and many would flee the city in droves for the more favorable economy of New Haomar. The destruction of the machine atop Ter Noaneth spelled the end of the reanimated corpses in Heritage Hill. Though at first few were willing to venture into the abandoned district, it was soon cleaned out and rebuilt. The district's horrors still fresh in people's minds, it would be some time before it was fully repopulated, but eventually the lure of cheap prime land would all but erase the memory. The Duke's assassination at the apparent hands of an animancer had caused catastrophic rioting in the streets of Defiance Bay. But those who had escaped the melee in the palace hearings remembered the testimonies of the strange guest who had shown up that day and absolved animancy, implicating the Leaden Key instead. The rumor spread quickly, and soon the popular belief was that the assassin had been a Leaden Key spy. When the legacy had lifted, people came to see it not as a sign that the riots had been according to the gods' wishes, as Theos had hoped, but as a confirmation that animancy had never been the source of the problem in the first place. Dyrwoodans instead convinced themselves that the riots had somehow purged Defiance Bay of Leaden Key spies, and that the end of Whitewind's legacy was their well-deserved reward. The rage against animancers was quickly forgotten, and those who had survived were permitted to return to Brackenbury Sanitarium and rebuild it so they might resume their studies. The rejuvenation of Cadnua was a short-lived endeavor. While the rise of a new master had presented new hopes of the keep being restored to its former glory, time proved otherwise. Plans for maintenance of the structure were postponed time and time again, until ultimately they were scrapped altogether, their master's priorities lying elsewhere. Adair chose not to return home. Still conflicted as to his role in the Saints' War and unsure of his place in the Deerwood, he took a ship to Adir and reunited with his parents. There, he resumed the quiet lifestyle he had grown accustomed to in his years as a farmhand in Gilded Vale. When the dust settled in Sun and Shadow, Aloth looked upon the remains of Theos Ixarchanon, his former master. He saw where the Grand Master had gone wrong and what would be required to undo the harm Theos had wrought. With a flick of his wrist, he burned Theos's robe, headdress, and every other symbol of the man's power. Never again, he vowed, should Kith live in fear and blind obedience to an authority they did not understand. Armed with the knowledge and courage he had gained on his journeys with the Watcher, he set out on the long and lonely task of dismantling the Leaden Key. After all that he had learned in the Watcher's company, Kanarua could no longer see meaning in his pursuit of the Tanvi Oratoa. He decided to leave what remained of it within the depths of the Endless Paths and return home. Kana bid the Watcher farewell and sailed back to Rawatai, spending the tempestuous journey reflecting on the time he had lost to the pursuit of falsehoods. His family found Kana much changed, his fiery excitement replaced with a weary solemnity. Determined to change his wandering ways, Kana took up a quiet life as a lorekeeper at the college, teaching young students the traditions of their people. Yu and Sagani never found Persoc together. The Adra figurine had gone dark by the time they emerged from Sun and Shadow, and it was another month before Sagani finally accepted that Persoc's trail had gone cold again. Her search took her beyond the Deerwood and as far as the Living Lands. She saw the great coastal cities of Rawatai and the ruins of Old Valia, absorbing the details of these strange and distant lands. 20 years passed before the Adra figurine finally glowed again. When it did, she followed its signal to a quiet hamlet on the outskirts of Adir. There, she met a young farmer and told her of her past as an elder of Masuk. Sagani returned to a village that had forgotten her face, but remembered her story. Masuk greeted her with cautious warmth, and Sagani found that their ways had become strange to her. She also learned that Kalu had perished of winter fever a few years before, and her middle child, Najuo, had died in a raid. But she found her daughter Yakona a hunter and mother of 3, and her son Malak a builder of mighty walls. In them, she came to find her place in the village and the familiar contours of a world that had changed in her absence. For you, the death of Theos brought an end to your waking visions and a silence to the whispers of the past. In their absence, you were able to sleep. The questions of a distant lifetime ceased to trouble your soul. All that remained was what to make of the answer. But at the moment, there was little to be done, and the matter would have to wait. A long journey loomed ahead.